Hola, señores y señoritas, and welcome back to Denver Behind Oil. I am sitting on this because we're about to start a new project. I'm not going to get into what I'm going to do this, but the point is all of the engine transmission and everything is coming out of it, and we are going to be putting all of it into, that's right, you heard it, another E30, another red one. Before, we posted a video on Instagram asking you guys to ask us some questions, which we did get a bunch of, so I'm going to try to address those as we go. I'm not going to touch on how to get the motor out of this. I've already done this several times. If you guys really want to see it again, let me know, or click the link to check that out. Either way, I'm just going to time-lapse you guys on this, but point is, everything out of this car is going to get serviced, and it's going straight into a 1991 318 IS for my buddy Nate Brock. So anyway, I'm going to stop flapping my gums and get to going, and we're going to do another build. So thanks for coming along for the ride. Let's get to it. Also, real quick, before you guys get mad at me for killing a 4-door Hellrod M3, it is very pertinent to know that this car has been wrecked multiple times. The chassis is bent, the suspension is tweaked, the struts are blown. This car is not a good car at all. Now, I will say that it's going to be making a return on the channel. I'm going to hint to that, and obviously it's not going to have the original drivetrain in it, but before that can happen, I need to dump a lot of money into this car, getting it fixed and buying parts. So it's got to go to the frame shop, etc., etc., etc. Doesn't matter. Don't get mad at me for killing it. Yeah. At some point, you'll see it back on the channel after I have dumped thousands more dollars into this useless salvage titled chassis. Woohoo!
Great place to start.
Yeah, so don't get hurt about killing an E36 M3. They made a billion of them. It's a US spec one, so no one cares. Let's be honest. And I'll be returning. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Let's pull an engine. Cue time lapse. Okay, what's going on, guys? As you can tell from the lack of an E36 behind me and the fact that there's a motor on a chain without a subframe, it is another day. So, engine prep is what we're talking about. That's what I'm going to focus on right here, right now. This is specific to all M5X. M as in Mary, 5X, name your motor, swaps into an E30. So now I'm going to just go ahead and be as succinct as I can and just hit all the points right off the bat. We actually did not get very many questions on either the Instagram or the YouTube, so there's not really anything I can answer for you guys as of right now. But remember, if you have questions that I don't address right here, follow me on YouTube, or sorry, Instagram, and you can be part of the next videos if you have questions. Anyway, most importantly, E24/E28 motor mounts, okay? Now, any single variation of these will work. I'm talking any. I have used all of them. This particular engine mount is from a 635 CSI, a late model one after 79. The 533, 535, and 528 E28 engine mounts are all dimensionally identical to this. Now, there may be some differences in the rubber. That's for you to decide. I don't know. I don't care. I haven't seen or found any difference in these motor mounts whatsoever, other than some of them have slightly shorter bolts on the top. That's all. That is the only change that I have found. They're all different part numbers, so don't worry about that too much. As long as it comes from an E24 after 79, a 533, a 535, or a 528 E28. That is what you're looking for, okay? Now, if you pulled your motor out of an E36, you're going to be wanting to use E36 engine arms. If you are curious to know what those look like because you're getting your motor out of something else like an E34, look at this. This is an E36 engine arm, okay? So the one that goes upwards from the block goes on the passenger side. The one that goes downwards from the block goes on the driver's side. This is a slant 6. I know everybody says inline 6, but by Webster's definition, this is a slant 6. Therefore, the engine mounts will be crooked. So the engine sits like that. Make sense? Cool. All right, next thing we need to talk about is exhaust. Now there are many different ways to do this. The one thing that you do need to know, the only thing I need to tell you, is that E34 headers do not work. They interfere with the passenger side engine arm. They straight up do not fit with the E36 engine arms whatsoever. So do not try to use E34 headers unless they are highly modified and you have welding and cutting and chopping experience. Having said that, you can also use eBay variations of almost any kind. There's a lot of header options for these, and some require slight hammer clearancing, some don't, but my go-to is always the OBDII E36 headers. So, you know, either S52 or M52, doesn't really matter. The E39 variations do not work either. So do not use E39, do not use E34. As a good rule of thumb, when doing this swap, do not use 5 series headers. Again, you can always modify, but that's not for me to tell you to do. These are S52 headers. An easy way to tell that is they look tubular rather than cast, or at least more so than the OBDII variants. They also have O2 sensors in both banks. Okay, so your OBDII cars are only going to have one O2 sensor in the mid pipe. The OBDII headers will have O2 sensors in both banks of headers and both sides of the exhaust. Now this is important for you guys because if you're doing an OBDII swap, you need to figure out where to put your your O2 sensors. If you're doing an OBDII swap, you need to weld these holes shut. Do not put your O2 sensor on only one bank. That is a good way to go lean and blow up pistons. So don't do that. If you are doing an OBDII swap and you weld these shut, a good place to put it is right after the Y pipe, about right here. So on any of these exhausts, what you can do is chop the front section off of an E36, whatever the car was that matches your headers. Match your Y pipe to your headers, always. The flanges are different, the piping size is different. And for OBDII guys, you want to put your sensor about 18 inches after the Y pipe. There's a good space to do it. I'll show you when we get in the car, but we're not to that yet. So that should cover our headers. If you would like to do, now for California people and Colorado people and whomever else has emission standards, if you are deleting for track use only your secondary air pump, you are going to want to weld this shut. Okay, so there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can either take this pipe off completely and fill these holes with weld. Okay, so there's a hole in each header right here, and you can either fill those with weld, or what I like to do is either weld this shut or just put the pump right here, or actually this isn't the pump, this is just the valve for the pump. But you can put this on and just not connect the vacuum or delete it in the ECU. That serves the same purpose. So that will function as well. If you are wanting to get your car fully emissions compliant, that's actually not that big of a deal. It's completely doable, and I will show you more on that as we get into the car. But the things you need to be worried about if you want fully emissions compliant swap is you need to maintain the function of this. You need to make sure you don't break this when you pull it out of the car. We're going to hook the vacuum up to it, and I'll show you all the wiring and stuff later. But one of the big things is OBDII versus OBDII headers, gaskets, and whether or not it works with this. So if you're OBDII and you want to maintain emissions, you need to make sure that you use OBDII headers. Do not use the OBDII headers. You will not be able to get the secondary air pump to line up, which will not pass a visual inspection, etc., etc. So for fully emissions compliant, I recommend using your OBDII stuff and maintaining the OBDII headers. It gives you much better fueling, etc. Plus, obviously, emissions. So that's good. Okay, moving on. The next thing we're going to need to do, above and beyond engine mounts, the biggest part of this is going to be swapping the pan. And now I'm going to show you the reason we do this is literally that the motor will not fit in the car without doing this. So this right here is an E34 525i from 1991 to 1995 oil pan. Okay, so M50, not M20. M20 pans do not work. You need to make sure you get this pan. They are getting very freaking expensive. I believe there's a few companies that are about to start reproducing them, but until they start doing so, you're either going to need to get really lucky at a junkyard or find a scalper on eBay that decides he wants to sell you a pan for about 600 bucks with the pickup and dipstick tube. So as I'm sure you may have imagined by this point, or if you've done the swap, you already know this, the E36 pickup, okay, so on all M5X motors, your oil pump is at the front. Now the E36 pan is a rear sump, which means that this tube has to run all the way back and then down. So what we're gonna do once I get this pan off, and I'll show you, is we are going to take that off and we are going to replace it with the 525 pickup. It bolts right on, no big deal, easy swap. It doesn't take more than a couple minutes. The pan swap is a little bit more intricate, but we'll get more into detail on that as we go. Now, having said that, the last piece of the puzzle here is the E34 525i dipstick tube and dipstick, okay? So this piece is critical in that you need to check your oil level. However, there are other solutions to this. If you cannot find one of these, an M60, that's right, a V8 pickup actually works. I've done it several times. The oil level is a little different. I'll see if I can find the measurements on it so you can remark it. But I don't want to tell you guys the wrong thing on this. Just make sure that you fill it to capacity and mark your high point if you're using an M60 dipstick tube. It does work, I promise you that. You're going to need to get a little creative on how it mounts, but it works just fine. That covers pan stuff. I'll get further into detail on what exactly you need to do to get this pan on, but above and beyond that, engine prep stuff, what we're going to need to do in terms of cooling is actually pretty straightforward. So this tube right here is the only one you're going to need to swap. This one lines right up and bolts right into the E30. The one coming out of the back of the head you are going to need to swap. Now, when I remember the part number and I go to AutoZone and actually get it, I will list the part number for you, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. There is an off-the-shelf part that works just fine though. You will need to trim it because it goes out and in very well, but you're going to need to trim the length of it, okay? Now there are also companies online that sell them as a pre-made silicone option for doing this exact motor swap, which you can go with. I don't have any preference on that, to be honest with you. I just like to use off-the-shelf part numbers, so if it fails and you're on the road somewhere, you can go to AutoZone and say, here's my part, and they'll get it for you. No big deal. But the main difference here is that this hose actually has to come out and then hook a 90. In the E36, this hose right here hooks up to the dual climate control valves. So it goes into the valves and the valves split and go into the 3-position heater core. So since we're not using a 3-position heater core, we will be using the L-shaped hose that goes directly into the input of the heater core. A lot of people talk about using the M50 manifold. I'm going to just go ahead and say it because I've said it before and a lot of people know this is how I feel, but the M50 manifold does not get you any fucking power gains, okay? Now, pardon my French, but this is an internet myth. Don't do it. It also is a much bigger pain in the ass to fit in the car, okay? So if you would like to swap that manifold, do so at your own power loss, okay? I can show you dyno videos that prove you lose about 20 horsepower. Don't do it. It makes it a pain in the ass, your hoses don't line up, and you lose power. Why the hell would you do that? I don't know. Unless you're turboing, forget about it. Anyway, so OBDII manifold is the way to go. The different intricacies of using the OBDII manifold is you actually have to have a way of regulating your fuel pressure externally, okay? So probably what I'm going to do, and I'm just now realizing I forgot to do, is remove the fuel pressure regulator from the E36. This is usually the way that I do it. You can also use just an AEM, or sorry, not AEM, but Aeromotive or any other aftermarket fuel pressure regulator, and you want to make sure that you get it to 3 bar. That is what these engines run at. So just do 14.7 times 3, and that'll get you your pressure. I want to say that's like 50 something. I can't remember. Any of the M5X motors run at 3 bar, so any of the regulators from those cars will work. The other thing that you can do is you can actually swap out the fuel rail for an OBDII fuel rail that has an internally regulated vacuum referenced pressure regulator. Sure, I said that quite jumbled, but you get the idea. The OBDII rail has the regulator built into it, so all you have to do is hook vacuum up to it, and then there are spacers that you can do. I actually can't see the fuel pressure or the fuel rail right now because we've got the cover on it. It is, I believe, at the back. It is at the back of the rail. The bolt holes don't exactly line up, so what you need to do is just take a tiny little piece of plate, drill 2 holes in it, bolt one to your manifold, and then bolt one to your fuel rail, and it works just fine. I've done it plenty of times, so no big deal. I'm trying to think what else.
Throttle cable.
Throttle cable, good call. So that's something we're going to do on the chassis side of things, but nevertheless it's good to mention. You can very much get creative with zip ties and make your factory E30 throttle cable work. Again, I've done it plenty of times. I'm not recommending that you do it, but you can do it. The proper way to do this is to get an E34 525 throttle cable. It is far shorter, and it has the proper rubber stop length to throttle end length that you need to match the throttle body. The main problem on why the E30 throttle cable is kind of a pain is because the length is far longer on the manifold. And actually, I'll show you since I have one. So chances are, if you guys are swapping your car, it was an M20 car. If it's a 4-cylinder car, I'm sorry this doesn't apply to you, but there's a bracket that bolts right here that is actually where your throttle cable clicks into. So the length from here to here is far longer. The distance that cable has to have outside of the Bowden tube, which is what that plastic covering is called around the throttle cable, is far longer. So what you have to do is figure out how to make up that space in order to get it to work. So if you're choosing to do it the cheap way, you can slot some washers, you can stack zip ties, whatever you need to do to actually space that rubber washer further back off of the throttle mount, which is right here. So your throttle cable goes right here with a rubber grommet, and if you're using, again, I'm telling you how to do this the wrong way, don't do this, but if you're going to do it, this is how you do it. So what you need to do is take off the plastic clip that typically goes into the M20 throttle. So the part that clips into right here, go ahead and take that off so that it's just a piece of metal, and then where the rubber goes in here, you have to space it off. Now, whether you do that with washers or JV weld or whatever the hell you feel like, redneck engineering, go for it. But I don't highly recommend it. I can't say I've ever had one fail, I'll be honest with you, but it's just not the right way to do it, okay? But if you don't want to do it the right way, that's the way. Additionally, power steering, you're going to be needing to use, actually, I believe you can use all E36 hoses. Now, to be honest with you, I haven't memorized that. I always forget which hoses I use because it tends to just line right up. But if memory serves, and I will correct myself if this is wrong as the video goes, but the E36 hoses can be used. You may need to do some slight bending or tweaking, but they line right up. The bolt sizes are correct. The lengths are roughly correct. They fit around the engine arms. Everything works. I believe the M20 stuff and M44 stuff also has the right hose ends on it. You may need to cut and splice as necessary, but power steering is pretty straightforward. I'll get more into that once the engine is in the car and we have a better visual and I'm not ranting about part numbers that I can't remember. Also of note is this little fella right here. Boop, boop. EWS delete. Make sure you do that. Your car will not start if you do not put EWS in it. Now, there are ways to get around this, but this has been covered quite extensively on forums, so I'm not going to get into it. It's also very easy to do by yourself at your house at this point in time with just a computer and a shitty piece of wiring cut out of a car at a junkyard. So if you want to do this, there's plenty of forums showing you how to do it. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Either buy one or go read a forum and delete it yourself. It's not that difficult. Also of note, one of our sponsors, Squid Tuning, does a delete. So hit him up. He can delete your ECU for you. So yeah, he's a good guy. Jay's dope. So hit him up. I think that is probably about it in terms of engine prep. So I'm going to move over to trans. What you guys are going to want to do in terms of linkage and carrier, first and foremost, the parts that you're going to need are your shift selector rod right here and your carrier. Those are the two most important bits. Your actual shift rod, the part that your hand touches, that the shift knob goes on, it doesn't really matter what you use, to be honest with you. I would recommend a Z3 1.9 liter shifter. It's kind of a factory short throw. It feels really good. It's not too short, it's not too long, it's just right, you know what I mean? So that would be what I recommend, but that's all a matter of preference for feel. But you're going to need an E36 M3 shift selector rod or a 328 IS shift selector rod. Those are the only two E36s that came with the ZF transmission. Now that is specific to using the ZF transmission. If you're using a Getrag, you want to use the 3 Series car that transmission came on. So let's say you had a 325 or whatever. You want to make sure that you use that shift linkage. You can get around this if you have a welder. I've custom made shift linkages tons of times. If you don't have the right one, you don't feel like buying one, you can't find one, no big deal. Genuinely, it's not a big deal. It's very easy to modify. So what I do is I'll put both ends in a vise, cut it, shorten it or lengthen it depending on what you're doing. So you can use your E30 one if you want. It's the same diameters on both sides. So if you want to use your E30 one and cut and lengthen it, you can, not a problem. But what you want to do is have your engine and transmission installed into the car. You want to have your carrier in the car, and then what you want to do is measure from the center point of your shifter to the center point of this right here, and that will get you your measurement from center on the pin to center on the pin, and you can cut and lengthen or shorten as necessary. I don't know the specific measurements, so you guys are gonna have to figure that out. I always just kind of do it by eyeball and either figure out, oh, I need to take a 1/4 inch off or an 1/8 inch off. It's never gonna be very much. You're never gonna be taking like an inch out unless you're using like an E34 or an E39 shift linkage. Those are really long. You can get them to work in anything by shortening them. So if you want to do that, go for it. The shift carrier, if you have a TIG welder and you're confident in welding cast aluminum, which I don't recommend, you can also modify, but probably just go online and buy one, or make sure that the car that you are getting your transmission from, you also get the carrier from. So again, if you've got a 325 drivetrain you're putting in your E30, you want a 325 carrier. If you've got a 328, you want a 328 carrier, so on and so forth. Match your transmission to your carrier, okay? This is gonna give your cup center point at the right length from the center of your shifter to the front of your transmission. So I won't go too tech heavy on that. I'm giving you guys the information you need to know. Just match your carrier to your transmission. And what I mean by carrier, just so we're very perfectly clear here.
Crystal
clear, love. Anyway, so this is your shift carrier right here, okay? While you have this out, highly recommend go ahead and replace this. You can use polyurethane. They sell them, they're super cheap. Garagistic sells them. Replace your shift cup, which is this guy right here. And if you don't know how to get that out, I'm gonna show you how to do it in 2 seconds. You take a screwdriver, you find the tab that's big right there, and you push it the direction that it's tapered, okay? So I would put a screwdriver on it right there, and I would tap it with a hammer to spin that cup, which depresses that tab, and it comes right out. A lot of people fight these because they don't realize that you can do that. That's how BMW designed it to be done. So do that. Also, like I said, shift cup, this ball wears as well. So if you guys are going for like a minty, perfect right off the bat swap, replace your shifter, replace your cup. Your shifter also has a bushing in it that wears, that'll wear against the shift selector rod. So replace your shifter as well. You're also going to want to replace the bushing with a Delrin bushing or polyurethane, doesn't matter, on the carrier side of the car. So on the car, and we'll get into this further when I'm putting the engine in, there is a bushing that this slides into that holds it on the car side, and on the transmission side, it's, well, obviously it's held by the pin that goes through the transmission, but that bushing on the car wears and creates a lot of slop and crappy shift feel. So you can use solid aluminum, you can use Delrin, you can use whatever you want. And actually, little sneaky tip, if you guys have skateboard bushings laying around the house, the truck bushings for your skateboard actually fit perfectly. No kidding. Like, it's the exact same inner and outer diameter. It works great. So if you want to be a cheapo and do it. I like redneck engineering. It's fun. Okay, I think that about covers it for engine prep. So I'm going to leave you guys with a nice little time lapse and some funky music, and I'm going to start swapping this pan. When I get to the part that is important, I will bring you back in and we'll talk about it. So see you in a sec. All right, so we are now at the pan swapping segment of the video. So, as you know, we need to swap the pickup. Now, there's a few things to note here while you're doing this. Firstly is this tab right here. So let me get this this other bolt out, and I will show you what I'm talking about, and then we can kind of compare differences in the two pickups, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about here. Like I was saying before, when you couldn't see it, this is the E36 pickup for a rear sump. We're converting to a front sump in order to clear the E30 subframe. Obviously, we need to take this off, and we need to install this little guy. So here's for your own viewing beauty. You can see where this relocates the sump about 18 inches from center to center. So puts this the same style as an M20 oil pan, which is great because that means our engine bolts right in. But what I was going to talk about was not the sump, was this tab right here. So there's two ways you can do this. The first way is the way that I like to do best, which is just to hammer this tab flat, but to make sure that you don't hit the windage tray. Now this right here is the windage tray. What this does is, as the crank is rotating, this basically lets there be no room between it prevents the crank from splashing through the oil, if that makes any sense. So it cleans the crank as it comes around. And this actually it makes a huge effect on horsepower. So don't ever remove these if you have one. If you're using an S52, so far as I know, all of the S52s have them. Now, the reason that I'm talking about your windage tray is because on the M50 in the E34, the windage tray is actually located in the oil pan. Now, this is important for you guys to know, because to fit this pan to this motor, what you're going to need to do is you are going to need to remove the windage tray. Now, BMW actually rivets these trays in place. It's like a friction rivet kind of deal. I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but regardless, they're fairly easy to remove, but you need to make sure that you're very careful in doing so. So what you're going to do, and not all of the pans have this, so if you see this tray right here, just this piece standing up, this is the windage tray. Remove this. Okay, this will not fit with the S52 windage tray, and the windage tray that was designed for that motor is far better than one that was not designed for that motor. Plus, this doesn't cover the entirety of the crank. That one doesn't either, but let's be honest, that one's better. We're going to take either a grinder or a drill. I prefer to use a drill. You can also use a Dremel. Anything that will cut or drill holes. And what you're going to do is you're going to drill here, 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 and here. And this tray will come right out. Make sure that after you do this, you don't do it right in front of a motor with an open pan. Metal in a motor is never good. I don't care what the scenario is. And B, make sure that you clean out your pan, because you don't want all of that metal debris going back into your oil pump and back into your motor. Now, chances are your oil filter will clean that out, but let's not even get into that scenario. So if you really want to be thorough, fill the bottom with rags, tape it off, do whatever you got to do, and then drill these out. Luckily, I believe I have a pan that has already had these removed, so I'm not going to dick with this one. I'm going to use my other pan. Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts that you need to remove. Swap that pump out, and then this pan will actually bolt right in with the exact same bolts that you removed from the E36 pan. So either keep the ones from the pan that you removed at the junkyard, or keep the bolts from the pan that you removed off of the E36. Either way, it'll work. Also of note, so the E36 gaskets actually work pretty well. They're rubber impregnated metal, so they're actually pretty legit. So as long as you make sure that the surface is nice and clean, and that there's no burrs on it that you can actually catch your fingernail on, it'll work just fine. If you have a pan that's all messed up, or a block that has scuffs in it from a previous dummy using a screwdriver or something like that, don't use a gasket. Use RTV. Do the tried and true method of putting an 1/8 inch of a bead all the way around the pan, right over the bolt holes, putting the pan on, tightening all the bolts finger tight, literally finger tight, wait 24 to 48 hours, and then torque them to spec, and use gray ultra RTV. But gaskets work great as long as you use the E36 one. They're just fine. Of note, when you are removing the E36 pan, I did not take off the power steering pump for fun, believe me. You actually need to remove it because it bolts to the side of the pan, and I'll show you where. So this boss right here is actually another mounting point for the power steering pump, and if it was an automatic transmission car, for the automatic transmission cooler lines. So that needs to come out, and it makes your life a lot easier if you just go ahead and take the pump off. It's 2 extra bolts, so I just went ahead and did it. Okay, this here is the one and only tool you will ever need to get rid of that. You don't even need to get rid of it. Just hammer it backwards until it almost touches this. You don't want it to be touching the windage tray because you don't want your crank or rods hitting your windage tray as it comes around. So be ginger, but also,
ginger but firm.
Ginger-ish. That's probably enough. You just want to make sure that you get it high enough so that it clears the lower section on the pan. This interferes with the pan, so you can cut it off if you want. You may need to go a little further than this, and honestly it doesn't matter which way you hammer it as long as you get it out of the way enough so that the pan goes on. But that's really all you got to do, and at this point, once you get your pickup on, you're ready to put your pan back on. Make sure you use a gasket for that, and auto parts stores do not typically carry that gasket. You can get it either for any M5X motor, any one of these motors, the gasket will work. But they're almost never in stock, so make sure you order this before you try to swap your oil pan. That is all I have to say about that. I'm going to go ahead and get to sealing the sucker up, and we'll move on to getting it on the subframe and ready to put it in the car. See you in a minute. So, engine prep. We are just about done with this sucker. This right here is your latest addition. This is not the hose I usually use, but I found it when I was looking for the other one, and it looks like it's going to work a lot better. As you can see, it's a 90-degree total, so 245s. The one that I usually use is more like that, but this is going to be fine. The cool thing is that this diameter on the inner is the exact same as the outer diameter on that water neck, and this diameter inner is the exact same diameter as that water neck on the heater core. So I believe this is a better option, and if you guys would like to use this, well, first of all, watch the second video to make sure that the fitment is correct, but 70773 is your part number, and that is a Dayco part number available at your local AutoZone. But yeah, so just goes right on there, boom, plugs right in, and I may have to do a little slight trimming or whatever, but that's about what we're looking for. So I think this is going to work fantastic, and I'm excited to see if this works because it was a $12 hose. That's exciting. So anyway, I appreciate you guys watching. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you're doing the swap, don't forget there's part 2, which is the engine installation. That's muy importante. So check that out. Also follow me on Instagram at DBLMurdo or at Denver Beer and Oil to get involved with the question and answer section of these videos when we do them. Anyway. Thanks for checking us out. Have a great day. We'll see you on video 2.